walking the serpentine path, following the footsteps of the ancestors, walking the serpentine path, making our way back home. Hey ya, hey, hey ya, ho, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ho, hey ya, hey, hey ya, ho. Following the serpentine path, life. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Serpentine Path podcast. My name is Claire Waudia Seed, and I'm a plant walker, song keeper, word weaver, artesana, visual and performance artist, womb wisdom keeper, and your guide on this serpentine path of life. Together, we'll dive deep into all things related to plant medicine, ancestral reconnection, intergenerational healing, womb sovereignty and bodily autonomy, rites of passage and initiation, time travel, shape-shifting, dimension hopping, the reclamation of our collective earth-based practices, and the ongoing, never-ending cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Welcome to the serpentine path where the ancestors have called us back to. Let's start at the end and find our way back home together. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Serpentine Path podcast. Today's going to be a solo episode, and it's one that I did not plan on releasing. It's not one that I had in the back of my mind that I was dreaming about, and I also kind of didn't want to do this episode for a lot of reasons. But basically, it was prompted by this podcast interview that I listened to yesterday about the dark side of ayahuasca. And there were so many things in that conversation that, of course, totally landed for me. I was like, yes, of course, like on the same page with this. And then there were also a lot of parts of that episode that did not align with me, and that I had my own questions and frustrations and rebuttals and feelings about. And it got me very fired up in a way that I didn't expect. And I was initially going to write something about it and post it on my Substack. And then I realized that it was like a much bigger, longer story that needed to be spoken aloud. And so I don't have any notes. I have a lot of thoughts and a lot of feelings, and I trust that whatever is meant to come through will come through for the highest good. Some reasons why maybe I didn't want to do this episode is because I'm in this very strange role on my path, which is, I'm a woman of 100% like European descent. I don't have any lineage that is mixed with the so-called Americas, with Africa, with Asia, with Oceania. I was born and raised in the so-called United States on Turtle Island and lived a very normal kind of middle class white American life. And then when I was 24, I ended up in the Colombian jungle for the first time, and I drank my first cup of ayahuasca, which in the Colombian tradition, ayahuasca is called yagé, so I refer to it as yagé. I had my first cup of yagé in the moment that I felt the medicine touch my lips and my tongue. I said to myself, I'm gonna drink this medicine for the rest of my life. And I had zero fear that first ceremony, which is hilarious, knowing what I know now about how my life turned out and about how this plant works and what I was getting myself into. But in that very first night, in that first moment when I met the plant, I had no fear. And my path took me like very quickly, very fast, very deep, which I'll get more into with the episode. But I ended up living full time in an indigenous village for a year and a half, being pretty much the only white person in the entire region of Putumayo, Colombia, not just in the village, but like the whole region. And I was with my elder teacher, who I've spoken about a lot on the podcast, Abuelo Kerawin, and his wife, Abuela Maria, who was also my teacher. And I was there at a very intense time when they were going through their dying portals. And so I was essentially helping to take care of them and midwife them through that death. And it was pure insanity. It was the most beautiful and most intense experience of my life thus far. And I've been on so many sides of having Indigenous people be like so open and kind and welcoming and like guiding me, orienting me, loving me as their family, you know. I've also had Indigenous people who have not been happy that I've been around. I've had mestizo people, so like mixed people from Latin America and from the United States, have a lot of questions about my path and a lot of their own internal feelings around race and whiteness and why a person like me has ended up walking the path that I've walked. I've had a lot of white people actually who have like done the most policing of my path. I've done a lot of internal policing of my own path and questioning why this is what I've been walking. And I always go back and forth between how much do I share and how much do I keep private. And that's a beautiful dance and practice to be in. But I do feel that there is a lot that could be useful to share with people, as I know that plant medicine culture and the world of ayahuasca, mushrooms, wachuma, peyote, combo, mixing in MDMA and LSD and ketamine and blah, blah, blah. There's so much in the spiritual soup that I myself have participated in and that I've navigated and that I've like come out the other side with just a perspective that I think a lot of people wouldn't expect, maybe. So this episode is like dedicated to all of that. And my highest prayer is that it can be supportive to people who are potentially questioning, like, do I ever want to drink ayahuasca? Do I feel like that's a plant that calls to me? I'm going to speak predominantly about yagé and the lineage that I know. But I've also sat with peyote. I've sat with wachuma slash San Pedro. I've sat with combo. I've sat a lot with mushrooms. I've never done like bufo. I highly, highly caution against that. There's other weird medicines that I haven't experienced, but I'll speak predominantly from my own walk with yagé. So my path with yagé technically started when I was 24. However, my relationship with the plant started a lot, many years before that. This is kind of how plants work. which is a hard thing to explain, but they don't work in the form of linear time that we exist in. And they don't work in the way that we can conceptualize like physicality and material reality. Like they have this capacity to expand their influence so far beyond just the territories that they exist in. So if people have listened to the introductory episode of this podcast, they've heard the story about basically what brought me back online spiritually, which was this experience when I was 20 years old and I was at my last semester of college and I was in this class called Complementary and Alternative Mental Health Studies with a lot of different guest lecturers. And this man came in. He was white. Yeah, he was a white man, like person of European descent. Came in and he was like, I'm going to guide you guys through some shamanic drumming. And I was so down. I was like, let's go. And what happened completely transformed my life. I went through a 15-minute long, like super intense vision, what I would consider now to be a pinta, like a full vision, altered state of consciousness, like profoundly transformative 15 minutes. If you want to hear more about that, you can listen to the introductory episode. But like, I feel that there was a moment before and a moment after that experience in my life. And what I know now is that that man had spent years living in Peru and getting very deeply initiated with the medicine of ayahuasca. And when he was drumming, what he was chanting were icaros, which are the prayers and the sounds and the chants and the channeling, not just of ayahuasca, but like of all of the spirits of the jungle, all the different lineages, all of the ancestors, all of that ancestral science is what is coming through when we're chanting icaros, when we're singing those songs. And so it wasn't until years later, probably 5 years later, actually, in one of my ceremonies, maybe like my 10th or 15th ceremony, when I had this memory of that moment in that university class when I had my first vision. And what I realized was that it was the spirit of the plant that had come to me and opened up my eyes to what my path was going to be. And so from 20 on, for like 4 years, the plant was guiding me in a way that I can only now see and recognize and understand the immense wisdom and love and care and consciousness that these plants have in our lives without even drinking them, without even taking them into our bodies. Like, just developing our relationships with them in that capacity radically transform our lives. And I think it's also important to note that like I was the only person in this university class who had any reaction to this chanting. Like everyone else in this class thought that I was batshit crazy when I shared what my experience had been. And everyone like hated it. Like no one was vibing with this guy and his drumming. Everyone was like, that was weird. I didn't like it. Like my feet fell asleep. Like this is whack. And I was like, did no one else just fully like shapeshift, transform, dimension hop into a different reality for 15 minutes? Like what's happening, you know? And I can just think about how immensely like lonely and isolating that experience was, because it was like the veil of truth had gotten like ripped away from me and I saw the world completely differently from that moment on. And that's when my deep, deep spiritual work began, was like that first moment, that meeting with the plant through those songs. And so my life went on. You know, I had 4 very, very, very rough years in New York City. I lived in New York for like 8.5 years in total, but like those 4 years in particular after college were so bleak, painful, traumatizing, just bad. I was so lost in the underworld of suffering. A lot of drugs, a lot of alcohol, a lot of sexual violence, a lot of loneliness, complete lack of community, just in the shit. And at some point I like heard the word ayahuasca somewhere, and I read a book about it, which is so funny. It's the one and only book about ayahuasca that I've ever read. I didn't even finish it. I don't remember who it's by, but it was essentially by this woman who had sat with ayahuasca maybe 10 times and wrote a whole book about it. I think it was called Grandmother Ayahuasca or something. I don't know. She had also only ever sat with it in like Costa Rica, maybe. So she hadn't even ever actually been to the jungle territories in the Amazon, in South America. Like at the time when I was reading it, I was like, whoa, this is so cool and interesting and fascinating. But there was also something that didn't resonate with me. And so I didn't finish reading it. And now I know it's because I think that, you know, there was just a lot of bullshit, for lack of better terms. I try not to be like overly judgmental, but yeah, it was just a bunch of BS. And so some part of me knew that I was always going to work with this plant. But I had pretty clear boundaries around, like, I knew that it was definitely going to be in the jungle. Like, I wasn't going to do it in upstate New York. I wasn't going to do it in Costa Rica or Mexico. I knew that I needed to go to the territory itself. I knew that it was needed to be with an indigenous person, with someone from the lineage, with someone from the culture. And I also knew that I was no way in hell going to pay like thousands and thousands of dollars for it. Like I looked into, retreat centers in Peru, in Iquitos, and in the Sacred Valley, and there were retreats that were like $5,000 for like 7 days or something. And I was like, that's insane. I'm not doing that. So those were like my three markers. I was like, I'm going to be in the jungle. I'm going to be with an indigenous person. I'm not going to pay thousands of dollars to do this. And then when I was 24, um, a woman who I was friends with at the time had been drinking with a taita. So taita, for those who aren't familiar, is the name that they give, the title that they give to an elder in the community, a male elder. Not always someone who serves medicine. A lot of the time they do serve medicine, but not necessarily. And then the maima is the feminine term for like the female leader. And so this taita that she had been drinking with a little bit was inviting people to his home in the jungle for basically 10 days of ceremony. And to be clear, this woman had drank with him like one time in the year before, and then she had come back to Colombia and had drank with him like a few more times, and then he invited her to accompany him in ceremonies, and so she was traveling with him alone for maybe like a month. I think maybe in total she did like 15 ceremonies with this man in her life in total before deciding to essentially facilitate a retreat, which I think is like the first big red flag for anyone who's listening. But so basically, this woman was like, hey, my taita, my teacher, is bringing people to his mountain. Who wants to come? And I was like, word, I'll go. And I think I paid $500 for like 10 days. And it was a really beautiful first experience and complex first experience in that when I showed up, I saw my friend, and as we were on our way hiking in the jungle, 4 hours deep in the jungle, mud up to our knees, like big backpack on my shoulders, like, where am I? Maybe about 3 hours into the hike, we're like an hour away from this man's home. She tells me that he tried to kiss her maybe like a week before or 2 weeks before when he was drunk. Um, and in this moment, I was like, fuck, what do I do? I have no idea what to do. I'm 3 hours deep into the jungle with this woman who I thought I could trust, who has been apparently building a very healthy, respectful, boundaried relationship with this elder, and he got drunk and tried to force her to kiss him. And when she said, no, I'm not doing that, his response was, this is your test of how dedicated you are as a student to this path and to me, and you're failing. And she told me this, and I was like, what the fuck do I do? And I made a promise to myself in this moment that if I felt any of that energy from him, for one split second, I would leave. And thankfully, that whole first week, everything was fine. For the most part. I mean, it was complete insanity. And what I know now about ceremonies is that, like, that experience should have never, ever, ever happened. The amount of insanity that this so-called medicine man allowed to be experienced by his patients, by his students in ceremony is just absolutely insane to me. Um, I won't go super deep into it, but just people doing the craziest stuff and him like not doing anything. There was a very intense sexual energy that was around the space. Yeah, just no orientation or guidance for like how to respect one another's processes. People just doing whack shit that shouldn't happen in a ceremony. And as a ceremonial guide and facilitator and medicine carrier and protector of this space, like it just should have never happened. However, I'm super grateful for that experience. You know, it opened my path with the plant and it was insanely intense. I was drinking night, morning, night, morning, night, morning for like 10 days. I would wake up in the morning on 2 hours of sleep, having just puked my guts out, with this man holding out another cup of medicine, being like, ah, buenos dias, here's your breakfast. And I was like, bro, I'm gonna die. Um, and I did fully die. You know, I went through a really beautiful, intense process. This was maybe like my third ceremony ever, was when this intense spirit came to me. Maybe it was an ancestor, maybe it was my future self, maybe it was the plant. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. But they came to me and said, you know, you have to take out your IUD, your copper IUD. That's why you keep getting back-to-back vaginal infections. Like you have a foreign metal object in your body. You have to figure out how to care for your womb without like essentially violating the laws of nature, like what you're doing to your body right now. And so I'm immensely grateful for that experience, right? Because when I got back to New York, I took out my IUD and I went on this deep, intense path over the past 4+ years of learning everything that I possibly could about how to heal my womb. So, all of that is to say, that first experience was perfect in that it was what I needed at the time. But then I went back just like 6 months later, and things were really, really bad with this taita. And in those 6 months, life was really hard. I went back to New York City and nothing made sense. I was like, how am I supposed to live in a place like this when I have just seen the things that I've seen? And I'm looking at the world and none of it makes sense. Like, I feel like I'm dying 24/7 and I don't know how to shapeshift between these worlds. Like, this doesn't make any sense to my brain, to my spirit, to my heart, to my body. Like, it was so out of alignment. And also, things were going really well in that, like, I remember coming back and people saying, like, oh my God, like, what happened to you? Like, you're so soft. You're so gentle. You have this, like, beautiful sweetness to you that we've never seen before. And I was like, yeah, I drank a whole bunch of ayahuasca. Like, I don't know. I guess that's what happens, right? And I didn't have any tools for integration. I didn't have any ongoing support. I did have a wonderful therapist at the time who like did the best that she could, but I just was like so entirely unprepared for how that transition was just going to rock my world. And I did end up eventually going back 6 months later, drinking again with that same taita. It was a horrendous experience. I'm not going to get into the weeds about it, but there was like so much alcohol, um, which was horrible to witness, to see someone that you thought you could trust and feel safe with, who is like drunk on the floor, crying in front of you, begging for forgiveness. And then having to follow him up to the mountain and drink medicine with him and to see the way he was interacting with other women and to feel very intense sexually coercive energy and to be in an altered state of consciousness and to just be like, what the fuck did I get myself into? Like it was really, really horrible. And luckily, I made my way out of it. And the reason for that was because, I met my ex-partner at this time. I met him on this mountain and he saw what was going on and he told me like, you can't do this. If you want a path with this medicine, you have to find better people that you can trust and that you can drink with. They are out there, but it's not here. And so I closed the door with that person, thank God, with that man who was serving medicine. And I figured out that I needed to go my own way. So fast forward a few months later, I packed up my entire life into a storage unit in New York City. And I booked a one-way ticket back down to Ecuador originally. I had heard of this family of medicine women who did ceremony, and I wanted to learn with them. And these women were not indigenous. These were like mestiza Ecuadorian women. And a part of me had a lot of questions about that. I was like, I don't want to drink with people who aren't indigenous, but also I don't feel safe drinking with men. And so I think that I really just need to be with women, even if they are, pretty much as white as me. I mean, they're mixed, but like you would look at them and look at me and be like, yeah, they're white. And so I was like, all right, I'm gonna go with the women because I need to feel safe and comfortable. And I'm grateful that I did. I'm really grateful that I went to Ecuador. I'm grateful that I learned with those women. I volunteered at their retreat center. There's a lot that I could say about retreat centers. I think I volunteered at like 3 retreats with them over a period of maybe a year and a half or something. And I think that there can be value to them. I don't want to completely write off ayahuasca retreat centers as like places that I don't think should exist because I think that there are potentially people who are doing good work. I also think that there's like a lot of messiness that comes with building a retreat center, building a business off of ayahuasca, and it's just a really delicate line to walk. But so anyway, I was in Ecuador and I did one retreat with them and I was like, okay, cool. This has been good, a nice, like gentle reintroduction back into medicine work. And also I know that I need to go to the jungle and be with indigenous elders to do this. I know that if I want to actually go deep, like these people can't take me there. And so I decided that I was gonna go back to Colombia. I decided that I was going to drink with the man who ended up becoming my teacher, Abuelo Keruin. At the time, he was 108, and I basically told people that I was going there, and everyone and their mother, both Ecuadorians and Colombians, told me, like, do not go there. You're a white girl, you're traveling alone, you don't speak really any Spanish. Like, this is a bad idea, don't go. It's not safe. And no part of me listened. Like, there was literally not a single part of me that was scared, actually. I had questions. I was like, what's the best way to get there? What's the safest way to get there? But I wasn't scared. And it's very interesting because the day after I made my plan to go to the jungle, my ex texted me and he hadn't had a phone. Like I hadn't heard from him in 5 months. We had not been in contact. And he messaged me on WhatsApp and told me that that's where he had been the whole time that we hadn't seen each other. He had been in the jungle with Abuelo Keruin. And I was like, that's crazy. I'm about to be there in 2 weeks. And so I went and I lived there for 6 weeks the first time. I was pretty much the only woman in ceremony most of the time. Sometimes there were like one or two other women. It was very male dominated. I never felt unsafe with the men. I never felt any bad energy from the men, but I did feel like masculine energy around me all the time. And when I met Abuelo Keruin, my teacher, for the first time, it was like the most nonchalant, casual. experience of my life. It was just this 108-year-old man sitting on his porch, hanging out. My ex-partner introduced me to him. He shook my hand. He asked me a little bit about myself and was like, "Cool, all right, we're gonna drink medicine tonight. I have some patients here from Ecuador that want a healing, so you're welcome to drink with us." And I was like, "Oh shit, okay." And so we went back to the house, we got our hammocks and our stuff for ceremony, and we came back and I drank with the abuelo for the first time, and it was yeah, maybe six of us in ceremony total. And I remember he gave me a healing towards the end of the night, and he had his hands on my back, and I remember just thinking to myself, wow, like these are the oldest hands that I've ever felt on my body. You know, he's 108 years old, and I could just feel such immense love and care and just like the purest, cleanest, most honest energy of like pure integrity with this plant. And I knew, like, holy shit, I have somehow opened a door to the most profound chapter of my life. And so I stayed for 6 weeks and I drank an insane amount of medicine. You know, I was drinking pretty much every night, usually like three, four, five times a week. And it was really, really intense. It was really hard. And I felt like I was going crazy most of the time. And I started to find my way with the jungle. You know, I started to figure out how to ground myself, how to find peace, how to find my center. A lot of that came from working with the land, just grabbing a machete and like carving my way through the jungle, working on houses, like building things, like not just sitting around all the time thinking about all of the insane visions that I was having. And then I ended up leaving. I went back to Ecuador. And then, you know, after that, I met back up with my ex-partner. We like officially started our relationship outside of the jungle because he was actually forced to leave. It got really dangerous in the territory. They couldn't have any outsiders, and so anybody who was not indigenous had to leave. And so he and I started our relationship, and we were traveling throughout Colombia, throughout Ecuador, and we were drinking with other taitas and medicine carriers. And we had some really beautiful experiences with some very wonderful and wise and generous people who shared a lot with us. And they were both, you know, indigenous people, non-indigenous people. We saw a lot of different ways of how people could work with this medicine, both good and bad. We ended up in Ecuador at one point at a Sundance that was happening in the middle of these really intense protests in Quito, in Ecuador, that were led by the indigenous people of the Andes and of the Amazon. And when I tell you these protests were like really, really intense, like sirens, helicopter circling, tear gas, a lot of police brutality, like intense protests. And then we went right from that to being in the Sundance, which is technically a ceremony from the north, from like Turtle Island, Mexico, so-called United States, that tradition. But they were doing it in Ecuador and they were singing Lakota songs from the Dakotas. And they were drumming and they were working with peyote and they were doing this ceremony and they were like praying. Um, and they were predominantly like very light-skinned Ecuadorian people, like people who were maybe a shade or two darker than my skin. And they were going through this whole ceremony while there were actual indigenous people like on the streets getting kidnapped, getting beaten, getting killed by cops for like really fighting for indigenous sovereignty and fighting for the land and fighting against the oil companies. And then we're with all of these kind of woo-woo spiritual people who are wearing the nicest feather crowns that I've ever seen, smoking with the most beautiful tobacco pipes that I've ever seen. You know, just complete spiritual incongruence with what I knew my path to be, and so we left. And also the medicine that they served was really bad. Like it actually made me feel really sick, and not in a way that was like purging, but in a way that I was just like, ugh, like I feel dirty and gross. Like this isn't medicine. This is something weird, you know? And right after that, we went back to the jungle with the abuelo for his 109th birthday. And so we had this very intense contrast between this, like, very kind of, I don't know how to explain it, like, unrooted, I think is the best way to say, an unrooted so-called medicine tradition, and then one that actually did have like thousands and thousands of years of lineage behind it, going back to the jungle with the abuelo. And we were there for his birthday. And then we ended up going with him to Cali in Colombia. And that was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. That was a ceremony with like 300 people. There were at least 20 to 30 helpers who were caretaking the space, half of those people being the abuelo's family. So his sons, his grandsons, his daughters, his granddaughters, all of his, the people who had learned under him for a long time, like huge team of people to caretake this ceremonial space. And it was incredible to see how a man at 109 years old could drive this space with such integrity and to keep people so safe. And the music and the dancing and just true beauty in that experience can only be facilitated by an actual master, like how he was, right? And then after that, I left and I did not end up back in the Colombian jungle for, I think, 9 months. And that was a really hard time. I was back in New York City. I was doing a lot of bullshit that I should not have been doing. Um, I went to Europe with my ex-partner to visit his friends and family. We went back to New York City. Things were like so bad in our relationship. We were, fighting and breaking up and getting back together and just total nonsense. And eventually we did end up back in the jungle. And at this point, the abuelo was starting to get sick and his health was really deteriorating. And we were there for a month. And I really thought that I wasn't going to see him again after that. I thought that he was going to die. And at that point, my partner and I went through yet another breakup. And it was just this really intense back and forth where it was like things were clearly not working in the relationship. But then we would get into ceremony and we'd be filled with all of this love and this joy and this beauty. And we'd be singing together and everyone would tell us how amazing we were. And we'd wake up in the morning and be like, we're healed. And that was just a constant kind of loop with the dynamic that we were in. But we did end up breaking up for like the third or fourth or fifth or seventh time. Couldn't tell you. And I went to Ecuador and he went up to the north of Colombia to work on his boat. And this last time when I was in Ecuador with that same family was probably the hardest because there was so much mixing of medicine, which is something that I really, really don't recommend. I remember one ceremony that was like a temazcal ceremony, so a sweat lodge. So I was working with the medicine of the sweat lodge. In that ceremony, we did like 2 rounds of San Pedro. So I had 2 cups of the medicine of San Pedro, which is an Andean cactus medicine. Then I was offered a cup of ayahuasca, and so I had a third cup of medicine that was ayahuasca. Then in the ceremony, I was also working with the medicine of mambe. So I was working with the coca leaf, and I was working with the medicine of ambil, which is the tobacco. So I had 5 medicines at that point. When I got out of the temazcal after about 5 hours inside of it, I asked one of the people to apply me some rapé, which is also a tobacco medicine with yopo in it. So yopo, sixth medicine. And then afterwards, I asked for some water, and the facilitator handed me his water bottle, and he said, "There's a surprise inside." And I opened it, and I saw something floating, and I was like, "Mushrooms?" And he was like, "No, take another guess." And it was peyote. So 7 medicines in my body in a period of about 5 or 6 hours. I do not recommend this. Like, to be so, so clear, that was incredibly dangerous for me to have done. And that was incredibly dangerous for the facilitators to have allowed. And after this experience, I ended up doing a 4 day long vision quest, which was beautiful. I was very grateful for that time I spent on the mountain, 4 days completely alone, outside, no food, no water, no talking, just me in the mountain. And that was incredible. And also, it was very clear that I had to go back to the jungle. And so I went back, and at that point, I did not leave essentially for a year and a half. I went back to the States for like 2 weeks for my grandmother's, for Christmas and for my grandparents' memorial because they died during that time. But I pretty much didn't leave for a year and a half. And this was like the most intense phase of my medicine work because at this point I was completely alone in the jungle. My ex-partner and I were in yet another like weird breakup phase. I was living there as truly the only white person in the whole region. There was one other person in the village who was from the north. And I was drinking probably 3 to 5 times a week, every single week, with my teacher, with his sons, with his grandsons, with his students. My Spanish wasn't great at this point, but it was getting better and better day by day. And the abuelo, my teacher, was moving through really intense waves with his health, really up and down. There were days when he could not get out of bed. There were days where I saw him do some of the most powerful ceremonies and healings that I had ever experienced. There was a lot going on with the family. And I was also in the deepest part of my process, which was essentially going through 20 years of a lot of sexual abuse and violence and distortion that I had experienced, starting at 6 years old, the first, experience of being molested, into my teenage years of a lot of rape, into my first serious relationship that was very sexually coercive, into my early mid 20s, where I was just participating in a lot of self re-victimization. And there was so much that had to be cleaned. And I would just go into ceremony, drink another cup, and pray that I wasn't going to die that night. And I did die spiritually hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. With every single cup, I had to face the darkest, the deepest, the most painful experiences, not just only of my lifetime, but like for full 7 generations back of a lot of sexual abuse in my bloodline. And it was truly god awful. Like, I can say it now. It was so hard. And I had so many moments when I would go to my teacher and just break down crying and be like, I cannot do this. I can't do this. I am not strong enough for this. I can't do this alone. No one understands what I'm going through right now. My partner and I are breaking up every other week. My family thinks I'm absolutely insane. People in the States who I, considered to be friends are like seriously judging what I'm doing right now. And then I'm here with a bunch of indigenous people who are like, who's this random white girl? Like very confused and suspicious as to why I kept hanging around for months and months and months. And I had multiple times where I went to my elders and I just said, like, help me. Like, I don't know what to do. And every time they were really calm with me. And they were so sweet and so protective and so caring. And they would just, take my hand and say, it's okay. This is part of the process. I promise it's going to get easier. Keep coming to ceremony. Keep spending time with us. Keep learning how to bead and weave. Keep drawing. Keep painting. Keep singing. Keep dancing. Keep finding joy. It's okay. You're okay. And I'm so lucky, like so goddamn lucky that I ended up with the teachers that I ended up with because there's very few people who are actually working with true integrity with this medicine and who are working as true healers and who are not manipulating and who are not coercing and who are not forcing and who are not abusing their power. There are so few people, and I'm not just talking about Westerners. I'm not just talking about white people or mestizo people. I'm also speaking about indigenous people. I interacted with many indigenous people who do not work with this medicine in a good way. They really abuse their power. I've also sat with a good handful of indigenous people who I can genuinely say, like, those are serious, true healers, honest to God healers who are only working with God, who are only working with the highest intention to bring love and care and right relationship with the laws of nature back into the collective consciousness after millennia at this point of just profound distortion, violence, colonization, racism, rape culture, white supremacy, capitalism, like all of it. There are very few elders who are walking in right relationship with this plant. And thank God that I found the ones who are. Thank God. Because the other part of this is that, I was getting softer. I was getting sweeter. I was getting more loving. I was becoming significantly more forgiving, more understanding, more compassionate, more gentle. Like I absolutely was healing deeply. And also, these plants magnify anything that is occurring. And so, any of our ego, any of our arrogance, any of our self-hatred and self-disrespect, self-betrayal, any of our manipulative or deceitful tendencies that we all innately have as human beings. I don't see any of this as a judgment, but just part of being a human are these sides, these shadow sides of us. All of that gets magnified and amplified and brought forth when you work really deeply with any plant medicine, but especially with ayahuasca, with yagé. And so while I was becoming more loving, more gentle, more peaceful, more spiritually aligned, more self-aware, blah, 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 there was also a side of me that was becoming more, how to say, like this, like rage-filled, red-eyed little demon that I have inside of me. Like when that part of me came out, that part of me was really present because of the way that these plants magnify everything. And so, in the way that my beauty and my joy and my creativity and my sweetness and softness and my femininity was like thriving and flourishing when I was in that place, it was the same when things were really bad. And I did a lot of whack shit, you guys. I did a lot of disrespectful, unkind stuff to people that I loved. I said and did things that I really deeply regret. Um, I was not always in alignment, always in integrity, always this like enlightened, little ayahuasca drinking jungle forest guru goddess. Like, please don't think that that was my experience. I had to see every single side of who I was at my core, including the sides that I was really embarrassed of, that I was really ashamed of, that I was really guilty about, the things that I just like could not face and swallow. Like the plant also brought that forth. And thank God that I had teachers who were watching this all happen and just kind of, had a knowing smile and their own little quiet, like, intuition that at a certain point I was going to decide that I didn't want to suffer anymore and that I would come to them for guidance and for orientation and for support. And so when I did come to them and say, I really need help, I really need to not act like this anymore, I need to grow up, I need to take responsibility for my behavior. What do I do? They counseled me when I came to them. And I would say that was outside of ceremony when I would come to them. In ceremony, they would just hand me big cups of ayahuasca that they would pray over and chant over. And then they would watch as I would drink, and my own self betrayal, self disrespect, self hatred that I was spewing out to everyone else in my life, like just was daggers back into my own heart. And they would just watch as I would scream and cry and puke and shit myself and suffer and beg for it to stop and beg for a healing and beg for someone to kill me and beg for it to end. They would just watch and they would take care of me. Obviously, they never let anything unsafe happen to me, but they let me go through my own process of seeing how all of the ways that I was hurting other people was just me hurting myself. And I had to feel it. I had to feel how fucking shitty it feels to turn the dagger outwards to people who, the only reason you're doing it is because you don't feel at peace in yourself. And so my elders watched. And they waited until I came to them and asked for support. And they always had a different response. Abuela Maria was usually pretty hard with me. Like one time she straight up yelled at me on the porch. She was like, "You have to eat more food. I don't know why you're being a vegetarian. Do you want to be sick? Like, you need to eat meat. And also, you need to stop doing a bunch of witchcraft on people. Like, you need to think beautiful thoughts and say beautiful words and feel beautiful feelings and, like, stop this bullshit." Like, she was so hard with me in the best way. Whereas, the abuelo, his two ways of counseling were often either with humor. I'd come to him and be like, "I think I'm doing a bunch of weird black magic. Like, what do I do?" And he would just laugh and be like, "Yeah, I did that too when I was your age. That's okay. It's good to learn. Don't do that shit anymore." Or there were times when I was really freaking out and crying, and he would just gently touch my hand and say, like, "No más, Clarita." Like, no more. You have to choose to find peace. You have to choose to stop suffering. It's okay, but find your peace, right? And so, I think if I had not had the elders that I had had, and I had gone as deep and as fast and as hard as I had gone on my path, I could have easily really lost my mind. And I say this because I've seen actually a lot of people really lose their minds with this plant. I saw a lot of people come to the jungle with big illusions, big ego, big pain, big trauma, big suffering, a lot of violence that they needed to work through, mental health issues, emotional health issues, relational issues, family ruptures, serious illness. I saw people come through and heal, and I saw people come through and get significantly worse. And what I would say about that is that at the end of the day, this plant can only do so much. And also, these healers can only do so much. And that's not to discredit their wisdom and their power and their like immense gifts to the world. But it is to say that like a person can only heal you as deeply as you're ready and willing to take responsibility for your healing, which means not outsourcing your entire life, your well-being, your peace, your serenity, your path to a plant, to an elder, to a shaman, to a healer, to a teacher, to anything outside of you. And so when we choose to work with any kind of plant medicine, again, I'm speaking about ayahuasca, but any plant medicine, it's so easy for us to start interacting with these plants in the same way that we interact with the Western medicine health paradigm, which is essentially outsourcing all of our autonomy, our responsibility, our capacity to like fully orient our lives and direct our paths and our future. It's really easy to come to these plants and be like, they're going to show me the way, or this elder is going to show me the way. This teacher, this like being that I'm putting on a pedestal, whether that is a human being or a plant being, or even like an ancestor or an angel or a guide, whatever you're putting on a pedestal above you is simply just a way for you to like let go of your responsibility for your own life. And so when I look at my own process and the times that things got really bad were the times that I was thinking that the plant was going to save me. That's not what the plant does. The plant taught me how to save myself, and then I had to do the work outside of ceremony, outside of the jungle. The people who I see really, really, really suffer with this plant and lose their minds and get very physically and mentally and emotionally and spiritually and relationally ill are the people who don't have the capacity to see that this plant is just a tool. No more. It is not the Holy Grail. It is not the answer for your suffering. It is not even something that I think most people should mess around with, in all honesty. I think that a lot of people could benefit from this plant when held in a coherent space that is stewarded by an elder. And when I say elder, I don't mean someone in like their 30s or 40s. I'm talking about like people probably in their 70s or 80s who don't have like this insane ambition and capitalist greed that has completely warped their relationship with the plant. A type of person like that who's working in integrity with these plants and who has like decades of experience, under their belt. In that context, I think that this plant can completely transform the world, truly. I really, really do. Because it completely changed my life in, 4+ years of working with this plant. I'm a completely different person. And also, my path is not a path that I would recommend to pretty much anyone. I don't think that going the route that I went with this plant is probably for like anyone else. Maybe a small percentage, very small percentage of people are supposed to do what I've done. But for most people, I really actually think that it would make them significantly sicker in a lot of ways. I would also say that, the big reason why I went so deep so fast with this medicine, one was because I had so much sexual violence that I had to clean. I probably would have ended up in some kind of situation where I would have died without having met this plant before, just based off of like all of the substance abuse that I was participating in and all the really dangerous and risky situations that I was putting myself in. I probably would have died. I needed like a big, huge intervention in my life. You know, I needed the universe to just slap the shit out of me and be like, you have work to do, like get it together. This is not your life path, what you're doing now. Like, you need to get on track. I would also say too that, you know, my elder, the abuelo and the abuela, both of them were some of like the last elders that are currently alive on earth that carried the degree of spiritual wisdom that they carried. And for those who aren't familiar with my teachers, you know, Abuelo Kerouin was the leader of his people, the Kofan nation of Colombia and Ecuador. He was the spiritual authority of yagé medicine in all of Colombia. He was a world-renowned healer and political leader. So he was invited to the White House, the House of Lords, to the World Health Organization, the Nairobi Peace Conferences. He was not just this guy who sat in the jungle and drank a bunch of ayahuasca and chanted. Like, he was an unstoppable force and advocate for human rights worldwide, predominantly indigenous rights of the region that he was in Putumayo, Colombia, in the Amazon. But his work expanded so far beyond just his community, his pueblo, his nation, his country, his continent. Like, he was, there are very few elders alive like him. There are still elders alive like him, but there's very few. And so the big reason why I had to go so deep so fast was because he was dying. And when I think back to that year and a half that I lived in the jungle and all the times that I actively tried to leave, all the times that I made other travel plans, all the times that I like almost booked flights, all the times that I almost booked Airbnbs, all the times that I was like, all right, I'm gonna be out after next ceremony. There was like this force that just kept me in the jungle and was like, no, you're not leaving. And whether that was the jungle itself, whether that was the spirit of the plant, whether that was the abuelo and the abuela, whether that was my future self that knew that I had to go through this initiation, I don't know. Probably a combination of all of those things. But I had to go through that because the abuelos died during that time. They died in front of me. And I had to understand what the weight of that was. To lose spiritual and political leaders of that caliber at this point in human history, where the work is so urgent, where we have to come back into reunification with the laws of nature, where we have to come back into true like brotherhood and sisterhood across cultures, across races, across socioeconomic classes, across gender and sex, across age. Like, the times are urgent right now. And with that urgency comes the importance to really slow down and understand what matters right now. And what I received from my teachers, the reason why we drink yagé, why we drink ayahuasca, the first reason is to better care for and organize our families and our communities, because the love of an intact family culture is the most indestructible medicine in the universe. That's the first reason that the abuelo told me we drink. The second reason is to come into right relationship with the laws of nature, what he referred to as indigenous law, which is not specific to any one indigenous lineage. What I would say is that it is indigenous to all of our blood lineages, as we were once all indigenous to somewhere, like really learning how to live by the laws of nature, the laws of the trees, the laws of the rivers, the laws of the fire, the laws of the mountains and the animals. That's natural law. That's why we drink yagé, to learn that. The third reason why he told me we drink yagé is to take care of the territory, to take care of the earth, to learn how to be land and water defenders, how to listen to the land and how to steward it. The fourth reason that he told me is to help indigenous peoples preserve their cultures, to preserve their way of life, to how would he say, fortalecer, which means to like fortify, to secure the strength of these wisdom keepers who do still have their own remnants of their culture. It's very fractured at this point in time because of all of the colonization that is ongoing, but to really fortify those peoples who are leading this fight, who are leading this charge, who are the ones who feel the impact the most deeply because they are still the most connected to the land and to the waters. And then the last reason that my teacher told me we drink yagé, why to drink ayahuasca, is to better fight for human rights all around the world. That's why you work with these plant medicines. None of those reasons have anything actually to do with the individual. None of it is really about like personal healing. And while you will receive deep, deep personal healing, because it is in relationship and inseparable from the healing of your family, of your community, of the land, of the waters, and of all peoples worldwide. Yes, it feeds you, of course, but that's not the point. And so when people ask me, how do you feel about ayahuasca these days, now that you've been out of the jungle for, I guess it's about 8 months now? And my honest opinion is like the only people who should work with this are people who are really ready to work. People who are ready to take on the deepest responsibility for their lives, for their families, for their community, to show up in the role of someone who is on this earth right now to bring joy, to bring love, to bring kindness and compassion and forgiveness, to bring understanding, to bring community building to the forefront, to rebirth intact family culture into the new constellations that are coming to Earth in our family systems. People who are able to be really honest with themselves about their own illusions, their own delusions, their own egos, their own shadows, all the parts of themselves that they don't want to see. Like people who are like, no, I can see that and still love myself. I can see that and still respect myself. I can still see that and value myself. And I can see that and still show up maybe for like my 9 to 5 job that I don't really love, but I need to keep doing for a while until I find a way to do something else. I really don't think that this is a medicine that people should work with and, sit in a couple ceremonies and then walk out and be like, The plant told me to quit my day job without any, financial plan for how I'm going to support myself. I don't think that people who are going to drink and say, oh, the plant told me that I should have a baby with this person or that I should marry this person or that I should, make some big crazy decision in my life because the plant, I'm saying that in air quotes, the plant told me. And I say this because I've done all of this stuff myself and I've seen how much damage it creates in your life when you outsource. And so these plants, they're so tricky. They are so they're master teachers in that they force you to recognize your own discernment in the process of accessing immense wisdom and esoteric knowledge, like what's actually going to be useful in my life, what's actually going to bring me into deeper health and coherence, what is actually going to support my family system, what is actually going to bring the deepest healing to my bloodline. It's probably not going to be just like taking a bunch of mushrooms every week or, sitting in ceremony every month, or just like checking out, using more medicine. It's probably going to be, going home and figuring out, okay, what are the top three things that I received in ceremony? There's probably 100 things that I received. What are the top three things? For me personally, they were I need to get into right relationship with my family. I really, really need to heal my relationship with my womb and my body and my sexuality and to, find all of the wisdom ways of the womb medicine that were not taught to me. And then the third thing, which I'm still really in the process of, is like, how will I support myself financially with my own dharmic gifts that I have been offered by my blood lineage, by my spiritual lineage? How do I really show up in the world in a place of service, like true offering, while also supporting myself? Those are like my three big things, That takes years to figure that out. That takes a lifetime to figure out, And so thinking that we will go into ceremony and we'll drink a cup of medicine and boom, like all my problems are solved, or like the thing that they say that I hate of like, there's a cup of medicine is like 10 years of therapy in one night. Like that's bullshit. That's complete and total bullshit. I think this plant can heal some of like the most deep-seated and embodied trauma that is still alive in our cells and in our tissues. I think that it can totally like shake us up and purge that out of us and like move. But then what do you do with all of the space that is offered to you after that experience is fully your responsibility. And the plant can only meet you to the degree in which you can meet yourself with like true reverence for your own dharmic work in this life. And so that's kind of where I'm at these days with it. I think the last thing that I'll touch on is just like my feelings about, ayahuasca retreats and whether I think that they're useful, helpful, valuable. I do think that there can be situations where they're really well done. I personally, I started technically with an ayahuasca retreat. It was very bare bones. I paid $500. There was no like integration, no facilitation, no preparation. Like it was very, yeah, bare bones is the best way I could say it. And I'm so grateful for that experience. And I'm so grateful for the actual ayahuasca retreat center that I volunteered at for like 3 retreats. There was a lot of beautiful stuff that they were doing. There was also a lot of whack stuff that they were doing that I totally don't agree with. I really don't agree with this whole like having to be vegan or vegetarian diet leading up to ceremony. I think that that's total bullshit. I think that people really need to be taking animal foods into their body when working with these plants. because they are so physically demanding. I had an elder say to me one time, like, I have no idea why all these ayahuasca retreat centers have this weird dieta that they claim is the ayahuasca dieta. Like, he said to me, like, hay que fortalecer el cuerpo por el trabajo, por la lucha, which means like we have to fortify and strengthen our bodies for this work, for this fight, for this battle. Like, you have to show up to battle with your utmost strength within you. So I don't agree with any ayahuasca retreat centers that tell people not to be eating meat. Obviously, I would say, eat organic. If you're gonna go get a chicken, make sure that it's like free range. I personally would just kill it myself, but I'm crazy, so do what you want to do. But I would say like that's a red flag to me. Any retreat centers that tell you not to be eating animal foods. A red flag to me when it comes to any kind of ayahuasca retreats. Like if you ask a person, what has your path been with this plant? How long have you been drinking for? How many ceremonies have you sat in? What kind of work have you done with yourself outside of this? What kind of personal development? What kind of alternative healing modalities are you also engaged with? If they can't give you any answers, or if they can't give you a straight answer, or if they can't give you an honest, direct answer that like truly lands in your spirit, definitely don't be working with that person. Personally, I would recommend more than anything to drink with an indigenous person if you can. But also, as I said, like, I don't fully trust all indigenous people at all. There's a lot that I've sat with who are doing whack stuff with this medicine. And so that's not also like the be all end all recommendation of like just drink with an indigenous person because there is very rampant sexual abuse. There is very rampant financial abuse and manipulation. There is very rampant spiritual coercion that happens with Indigenous peoples. And that's an unfortunate shadow side that I'm not going to speak too much on, but it's real and it's unfortunate. And so it does require like really doing your research, really finding people who you trust, really finding like a good network, and most importantly, like listening to your own discernment. I know that the majority of people who come to a plant medicine path are often people who have tried like everything else. They've tried every other modality. They've tried every other healing system. They've been in years of therapy. They've tried to get clean from drugs and alcohol. They've tried, to heal their porn addiction. Like they've tried everything and nothing works. And so I can really empathize with like the desperation that a lot of people come to a plant medicine path with because I too was once in that place. And so I really get it. But this is not something that can be fucked with. Like when we're talking about this degree of being in an altered state of consciousness that is so strong, you are so vulnerable and you have to be with a person who is working in integrity, who is working with God, who is working in the light, who is working with the deepest love, the deepest care and protection that they can offer you. That is the only way in which this plant is actually going to help you heal yourself, offer you the tools to heal yourself. Otherwise, I promise you, it's going to make it like 100,000 times worse. And it's better that you just don't drink at all. And then the last thing I would say is that it's really, really important to create the spaciousness in your life for the integration process after, to have support systems in your life, like most importantly, I would say maybe like a mental health professional or someone who does any kind of psychedelic integration work to help you really root these teachings into your body, most importantly, like to take it from the brain into the body so that you start embodying all that you learned, so that everything that you received in ceremony gets interwoven into your everyday life. And so then you are the medicine. You yourself are the transformation in the world that you got to see in those beautiful visions. You yourself become the love. You yourself become the true compassion and forgiveness. And that comes first, of course, from doing that with ourselves. And then it comes from being able to like spill our cup over and do that with others. And that takes time. And the answer is not always more medicine. And this is coming from someone who has drank in hundreds of ceremonies. Like, I couldn't count how many times I've drank ayahuasca, hundreds and hundreds of times at this point. And I can tell you, the answer is not always more medicine. The answer can sometimes be more medicine. But I had my own experience where I went back to the jungle back in February and I thought that I was going to be drinking for a whole 2 weeks straight. And I sat in one single ceremony and I realized, wow, I haven't done any of my work that I need to do before coming back to this plant for more orientation and for more guidance. It was like I had been given many assignments and I went and didn't do a single one of them. And then I came back trying to be like, okay, like give me more. And that plant teacher was like, are you kidding me? You can't even do like your basic arithmetic homework. Like you're asking to do like insane, complex mathematical formulas when you don't even know how to do addition in your own life. Like go back to the States and figure this shit out and come back when you're serious, you know? So it's not always the answer, more medicine. A lot of the time, the answer, really, at the end of the day, is eat 3 meals a day, get enough sleep, spend time in nature, learn how to make peace with your family, figure out what it is that you really want to dedicate your life to, and then start dedicating your life to it. Figure out your finances. Maybe that means that you have to get a shitty side job that you so don't want to do. I'm literally serving tables at a restaurant for this whole year to get my finances in order to build up my savings. You think I want to be doing that? No. But it's also the most beautiful gift of structure and stability and to spend time with people in this 3D world who couldn't give a shit about ayahuasca, who are talking about Love Island. Like, and I love them. They're so fun to be around. They're amazing people, you know? Like, I'm no better than them. I'm no more spiritual than them. I'm no more enlightened than them. I'm no more advanced than them. Like, I can really just be in this 3D world and say, like, what a gift to live this life. I don't have to run back to ceremony to remember that this life is incredible. I can step into ceremony with clarity, with intention, with love, with gratitude, with an open heart to receive something that I also already know inside of myself because these plants only reflect back what it is that we hold inside of us. And so the deepest, deepest, most intense beauty that you see in ceremony, that's the beauty that you hold inside of you. The most intense love that you experience, that's you. The most profound wisdom and knowledge and esoteric craziness, like you hold that in you. And so it's yes, it's good to go into ceremony to remember those things, but you can remember that every moment of every single day. When you feel the sun on your skin, when you feel your heart beating, when you feel your smile on your face, when you look at all of the beautiful things that you're planting, that you are cultivating, that you are caring for, that you are responsible for, that you are growing, all of that you don't need to be in ceremony for. Your life becomes your ceremony. And then plant medicines are just like cherry on top, right? Okay, I think I'll wrap up there. That was a lot. Again, didn't plan any of that, had no idea what was going to come through. I hope it lands for people. Sending a lot of love. I'm always open to having more of these conversations with people. If people have questions, if people want to email me, I'll put that in my bio, or in the show notes. I write about a lot of this stuff. Yeah, I'll continue sharing about these things. I'll continue having other guests on the show who talk about these things. It's obviously something that I care deeply about, and I'm grateful to anyone who took the time to listen. If this plant makes its way to your life in any way, even if it's just through listening to this episode, that's so beautiful. And if at some point you decide you want to go deeper, that's really beautiful. I'm happy to be a resource to people. You can email me. I'm around. All right. Thank you guys. Lots of love. Take care.